on state affairs for local and international politics, security, extensive economic analysis, interviews, and world power play.
Nigerians must choose the path they want to follow. Follow the same looters and sponsors of violence who control the political structures or encourage the formation of a new leadership team.
Be a global citizen and join the radio revolution on State Affairs. State Affairs with Edmond Obilo. Radio just got deeper. State Affairs with Edmond Obilo is live.
Hey. Welcome to the Radio Man's Time. Welcome to this class of politics, history, and power. It's a beautiful day in Africa. It's a warm day in Ibadan. And from here, I will tell you the story of Africa. The story of Africa is replete with beautiful, bad, and ugly stories. That is somewhat the story of life. Having said that, the aim of this show is to build a beautiful Africa. An Africa that will impact the world technologically, culturally, politically, and developmentally. That Africa is within our reach. So, it is me and you on this edition of the program. So I have left the number there. Let's interact. Let's rack our heads. Let's proceed. Let's assert our views of Africa. That's what this edition of the program is for. I will tickle you with my level of analysis. I'll move you here. I'll move you there. I'm here to trigger the discourse. I am Edmond Obilo. So welcome to my word. Let's talk about the science of learning in the age of new media. But the focus is the challenge for Africa. That's the focus of this edition of the program. So I want to look at that main theme from different dimensions. The first dimension is what I have called the science of learning in the age of new media. Why did I say the science of learning? Here, I'm going to use nature to make some statements. We are in the age of information outburst. If you go online now, almost everyone is a content producer. Everyone has got something to say. If you go on X, you go on Instagram, on Facebook, we are talking, we are negotiating. There's a lot of information that if you are not careful, you will be lost in the express road of information. I call it information outburst. And sometime in the outburst, you would find in-depth media outcomes. And in-depth media outcomes is necessary for national development. As we talk about outburst of information, you would also realize that millions are consuming the information. So I can say there is that online hunger for information. And this has opened the media of the future to the advantage or disadvantage of misinformation. Why advantage or disadvantage? It depends on where you are coming from. To the man who is misinforming, he hopes to gain some advantages. For the one who has been misinformed, he has fallen to the disadvantages of misinformation. It is an all-comers affair. And when it's an all-comers affair, it renders unedited narratives. Are you with me? Raw in form, as caustic as ever. There's a lot of insult online. There's a lot of attacks. It is caustic. But you imagine a world without phones, without television, radio, newspaper, and social media. What would the world be like? Would you enjoy such a world? The distances will be obvious, and it will look as if man has returned to its primitive state. Would that be possible? That will return to the primitive state. No phones, no television. It is due to the innovative mindset of man that society continues to witness creations to better the person, the society. So with these platforms of communication, the world becomes a small place as borders are broken with fast-speed internet, causing cultures to clash in ways never seen before. As the 21st century flattens the world rapidly, media power becomes decentralized as citizens tell their stories and debate the quality of messages. That is why it is an engaging word. Let's engage. I'm engaging your thoughts on this edition of the program. Engage me too by leaving your comments or by even calling in. The word has never been this engaging. It is information tsunami. It is looking like the world is troubled by the truth and lies in information. For African states like Nigeria, the danger is in giving information to citizens who are not learned enough to analyze them. Holding government accountable in this system becomes a long-winded struggle. But it can be sudden. Look at this. The political elite in Africa, the political elite in Nigeria are destroying the education system to ensure that the citizens are denied the knowledge of the science of learning. How? Learning leads to understanding. Those who take time to study events and places end up telling the world the direction to go. That is why the world called them deep thinkers, philosophers, innovators. This form of learning is seen in the study of certain lions in the heart of nature. See, those who lead the world are those who think ahead. They study everything. And that is what gave Europe the push to overtake the rest of the world and dominate it. And when I say Europe, I mean the West, including America. Let's look at the study of nature and make some meanings from the narrative. I want to talk about the Mapogo Lion Coalition. I've always been fascinated by lions. So in June, I went to one of the biggest game parks in the world. That is the Mai Samara in Kenya. I saw elephants. But I wanted to see a pride of lions. I wanted to be able to see the pride of lions from a close range. Having read about the Mapogo Lion Coalition, I wanted to see how a pride of lion behave. Luckily, we ran into a pride of lion. And it created a picture of the Mapogo Coalition that I have studied repeatedly. Come with me. The Mapogo Lion Coalition roamed the Kruger Park in South Africa. While they moved, they killed and took over prides with ruthless precision. They were brutal. The Sabine Sand region of the park was their fortress. They were a band of 6 lions, infamous for their brutality and strength. Makulu was their leader. To take over prides, they killed in excess of 100 lions and cubs. They preyed on lions. They were a mega pride male lion coalition. By sticking together, they increased their survival chances. Have you learned any lesson from that? By sticking together, they increased their survival chances. It's a rule of life. Cooperation gives society the best. Cooperation brings beauty to relationships. Take note of that. At this level of Africa's development, we need intense cooperation, not competition. I am looking at the Mapogo Lion Coalition. A pride, a mega pride for that of male lions. While they were growing up, they learned cooperation. The 16 years put into studying and documenting them is the purpose of the science of learning. Some group of scientists put in 16 years to study them. It's about learning. In Africa, do we study our problems to solve them? Remember, the title of this broadcast is The Challenge for Africa. The Mapogo Lions has brought us to Africa. Indoctrinating the citizens in the science of learning remains a challenge in Nigeria, in Kenya, in Ghana, in Africa. So if you go on social media at the moment, African social media, I'm not talking about America's social media, Nigeria's social media to be precise, comedy dominates popular culture. For underdeveloped states, comedy comes with a blanket to cover their tragedies. You get me? There is problem, there is pain, but they have to laugh to forget their tragedies. The problem is not the comedy. The problem is the laughter that leads to the forgetting of their tragedies. If they laughed and are awakened to solving their tragedies, then it becomes comedy for national development. What do you think? I'm raising some points. As they laugh, harder times await them. As more of their brothers take to the profession of comedy, their tragedies continue to rise. The problem is not comedy. The problem is the consumer of comedy. But the subject is not comedy. You know, this is a political class, and I am reflecting. This is the reflection of Edmondo Pillow, the radio man. Reflect with me. And I'm happy you're here. It is my time to reflect. I'm on duty. So welcome to the class of politics and power, the class of reason, of history. Yes. This is not to say that comedy has no therapeutic effect. I've made that point. I'm only trying to find out why the Delegiwas could not stop the rot despite the eye-opening investigative stories. So I've come in with another dimension to the subject. That despite the outbursts, the influx of comedy, men engaged even in investigative stories and other forms of hard intellection are yet to solve the tragedies. Then the problem must be the African. Are you with me? Yes. Have you asked why we cannot build our societies to the standard of South Korea or Singapore, even when we started the race for development at the same time? Have you asked? Ask yourself. So when I'm talking, I'm not talking to Tinubu alone. Neither am I talking to Nana Akufo-Addo alone. I'm also talking to myself, Edmond Opilo. I'm talking to you. Yes, you. Yes, I'm talking to you. It is time we began to ask deep questions. Remember the question: why are we not building our societies to the standard of South Korea or Singapore? It is also because our education is geared towards regurgitation or cramming, not thinking. 1 + 1, 2, 2 + 2, 4, 3 + 3, 6, 4 + 4, 8, 5 + 5, 9, ONE 1, TWO 2. 4 + 4, 8. How? Can 4 + 4 be 10? Questions. To every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Newton's law. How? I love teaching. Teaching is my first love. As a youth corps member, I was quite active in Orientation Broadcasting Service, OBS. In fact, that was where I developed my love for broadcasting. They saw how passionate I was in disseminating information on camp, and they wanted to post me to either NTA, Radio Nigeria in Ibadan. When I got wind of that information, I somewhat ran to somebody I knew. I said, no, post me to a secondary school. I want to teach. And this was the time youth corps members were running away from teaching. I wanted to teach. Somehow I found my way into St. Louis Grammar School. And I had the opportunity to teach physics. So I asked the student, when a ball gets to the maximum height, the velocity is equals to what? All hands were up. Sir, sir, sir. I said, okay. You tell me. They said velocity is 0. Now when the ball gets to the maximum height, that the velocity is 0. Okay. That is at maximum height, v is equals 0. I say, yes, you are right. You're right. Hey you, Ogachuku, how? The class went quiet. They know that v is 0. I said, how? Explain. No, none of them could. Okay? That is one of the problems of learning in Africa. So I told them, it is simple. This is why it is 0. Velocity means for a body to have a velocity that is above 0, it simply means the body is moving. That means it has speed. If it is moving, it has speed. So by the time a ball gets to the maximum height, when you throw anything up, it gets to a point, it begins to come down. That point it gets to before it begins to come down is known as maximum height. So when the object gets to the maximum height, before it begins to come down, it will rest. It's like when you run to a wall, for you to turn, there's that momentary stop for you to turn. At that point where you stopped, where the object stops, that is called maximum height. At that point, it is not moving. That is why at maximum height, velocity is 0. And they said, And these were SX3 students. I used this narrative to explain the way we learn in Africa. Yes, the theme of this class is the challenge for Africa. And we are working into it. So I have made the point that our education is not geared towards thinking. And that is the reason we are in the lead in borrowing everything foreign, buying everything produced outside. We can't produce. Because for you to produce, you must be thinking. For you to invent cars, you must be thinking. You must be developing theories. We are not producers, we are mainly consumers. Even our main religions are borrowed. Our institutions are designed to look like theirs, yet we are who we are. We like good hospitals, yet we cannot build and maintain them. We prefer the one in London. That is why Buhari was always in London as president for medical care. As a president who had all the structures to build a modern, advanced medical facilities for his people. He didn't have the thinking power. The thinking power to know that it was essential for the survival of his people. So he would take the easy way out. Let me go to London. Like Tinubu will go to France. Right? And UCH is collapsing. It is about the mind. It's about thinking. Are you with me? Our institutions are designed to look like theirs. University of Ibadan can wait. We are on our way to Harvard, Oxford, Cambridge. It has become the in thing now. On the grounds that Nigeria is failing, every parent wants their children to school abroad. What do they bring home after schooling abroad? They don't even come home. The more they school abroad, the poorer the country becomes. There's something also wrong with that. You could see, if it is China, they would go learn. About half of them will go home to go and exert that knowledge in China. And you can see China is competing with America. For Africa, it's a thing of prestige. Oh, my son is in London. Oh, my daughter lives in the US. It's a form of prestige. They are not asking, what is my daughter contributing to the development of Africa? There's nothing wrong in going in search of knowledge. Knowledge for what? Are we improving Africa? Ask yourself. The word in the mouth of everyone now is Jackba, Jackba. You even seen bank managers are Jackbaing. I'm saying, what is their problem? What do they want? Somebody earning about 2.5 million feels things are still bad and they want to leave. Who will solve the problems of Africa? It's about the mind. We dream big and do little. It is true that the elite political class has taken advantage of this condition to ride roughshod on the people. But there is a trend that shows that the science of learning has come alive as champions of a progressive future find spaces in an expanded media system. But there are still few of them. I see them and they give me hope. I call them champions because they have acquired the temerity to navigate the ship of hope. However, we are on the road to the red line. The state will produce accountable leadership when those plotting to shrink the media space come in frontal confrontation with those who insist on media freedom. This is not a fight for the traditional media that is gasping for bread. There is a quiet, ongoing movement for a future of hope. It might appear leaderless at the moment, but it will lead Africa to advancement. Hello. It is State Affairs with the radio man, Edmondo Pillow. The theme is the challenge for Africa. Charles Onwama is watching. Thank you, Charles. Shuaib Oladipo says the bane of development in Africa is bad leaders, not just leaders alone. When leaders are bad, there's something wrong with the mindset of the community. Leaders are product of their environment too. Akonye Umoba says, I'm not praying or glamoring for a better Nigeria anymore. Let every region go their separate ways. You know, I hear this all the time. The same people who are in Nigeria will make up the regions, is it not? Will they fall from heaven? You know, when I hear regional government, yes, it might bring some advantages, no doubt, but it also has its own disadvantages. The same Hope Uzodinma will govern their regions, is it not? The same Gandujes will govern their regions, is it not? The same mindsets will infiltrate the regions. You know, as if, once we go to our regions, Eldorado will come. A country like Eritrea is a small country governed by similar people. Somalia is one of the poorest countries in the world. It is one tribe. It is one tribe. Not two tribes in Somalia. One people. And they are killing themselves. You know, create an Ibadan state now, or create an Oyo state as a country. You will now discover that Okyogun, people will now say they are Okyogun. You will now see their Okyogunness. You will now see the Isai man as different from the Ibadan man. That commonality that is Yoruba will disappear. You will say it. It will now become a struggle. Okay? That is not to say that regionalism doesn't have its advantage. But it does not proffer the ultimate solutions. That's the point I'm making. That's the point I'm making. It was the Eastern region at some point, right? Have you asked why the Jaws, even the Ibibio, the Kalabari people, why did they not support the Core Igbo during the war? They were from the same region. Because they were scared of dominance. The program is State Affairs. And we are presenting from State Affairs Studio here in Ibadan. You can share this broadcast, and I will be glad to see you sharing. Follow me on all social media platforms. I'm on X as Edmond Obilo, at E Obilo. I'm on Instagram as E Obilo. We have a State Affairs app. We are upgrading the app, and we are streaming on that app now. If you download the app, you'll be able to connect with me as I'm speaking. You'll be able to connect with our YouTube page and the podcast page. From that app, you'll be able to read my articles. Like I just did an analysis now about the science of learning. I cited the Mapogo Lion Coalition. That is a write-up from me. So download the app on Google Play Store. And if you are using iPhone, you can get it from Apple Store. I want to hear from you before I proceed. So you can call. I want to hear from you. The lines are there. You can call. Let me take a deep breath as you enjoy the sick tune. Yes. As we go on with the analysis, let's reflect on a book. So I want to advance the discourse. Can you see this book? I got the title of this edition from this book, The Challenge for Africa. I took the title of this edition from this book's title, The Challenge for Africa. You see it? A book written by Wangari Maathai. Wangari Maathai, winner of the Nobel Peace Prize. Mandela says he hopes the world will support her vision of hope. This was one African woman that died, and I felt a part of me was gone. I loved her. I loved Wangari Maathai. The first time I traveled to Kenya in 2013, I wanted to see her by all means. Then the African Union sponsored us to Kenya to study deforestation, one of the challenges of Africa. So this book is a classic. This book is a classic. I want to read from some parts of the book. I want to read from chapter 8 of the book entitled Culture The missing link. Let me take some lines from 161, page 161. Wangari Maathai says, people without culture feel insecure and are obsessed with the acquisition of material things and public displays, which give them a temporary security that itself is a delusional bulwark against future insecurity. She continues, we see this in many places in Africa today. An example of the destruction to African cultures wrought by the imposition of arbitrary imperial boundaries can be seen in the fact that while most of us know what might constitute a French, Russian, Chinese, Japanese, or Indian culture, it is impossible to speak meaningfully of a South African, Congolese, Kenyan, or Zambian culture. According to Wangari Maathai, her long-standing attempt to understand the impact of the destruction of culture on Africa's current challenges has partly been a personal journey to discover who she really was. Still reading from page 161. It began on my first day of primary school, when I was too young to appreciate the deliberate trivialization of my culture and the political, economic, and social impact of the colonial administration's imposition of their culture on us. I just read from page 161. If you read this book, you begin to have deep rethink of some of your belief and why Africa is really backward. If you go on udarabooks.com, you'll get a copy of this book. We just brought in some copies. So we have abundant copies, because I told myself that these books should be in the hands of many Nigerians, Africans. So you can get this book on udarabooks.com. And you can buy it through the WhatsApp numbers displayed on this broadcast. Let me tell you more about the book. The Challenge for Africa is a thought-provoking, insightful book. It is written by Wangari Maathai, late Wangari Maathai, a renowned Kenyan environmentalist, political activist, and Nobel Peace Prize laureate. In this book, Maathai addresses the multifaceted challenges facing the African continent, and she offers her perspectives on how these challenges can be met through sustainable development, good governance, and environmental conservation. What are the key themes of the book? One is sustainable development. In this book, Wangari Maathai emphasizes the importance of sustainable development in Africa. She advocates for economic practices that meet the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. She thought of the future, and that is visionary leadership. People who think of the future, they measure the consequences of their actions. And they are visionary because they want to carry out actions of the moment that will benefit the future. That means they see 50 years ahead and they prepare their people for development. That was how Western societies got it right. They had visionary leaders who don't just eat everything today. Still talking about the book, The Challenge for Africa. This book, I recommend it to you. You need to get a copy. In this book, Wangari Maathai discusses the significance of balancing economic growth with environmental conservation and social equity. She emphasized on good governance as another key theme. The book explores the critical role of good governance in addressing Africa's challenges. Maathai discusses the importance of transparent and accountable leadership, the rule of law, and citizen participation in decision-making processes. She highlights the impact of corruption on Africa's development and calls for ethical leadership. I'm reviewing the book, The Challenge for Africa, written by Wangari Maathai of blessed memory. I'm reviewing this book. One subject she laid a lot of emphasis on is environmental conservation, protecting the environment. Remember, she won a Nobel Peace Prize because of her role in protecting the Kenyan environment. In this book, she places a strong emphasis on the need for environmental conservation in Africa. She discusses the consequences of deforestation, soil degradation, and climate change on the continent. Maathai advocates for sustainable environmental practices and afforestation as key strategies for preserving Africa's natural resources. Through her Green Belt movement, she led the movement for the planting of millions of trees in Kenya to protect Kenya from environmental hazards. If you go to Kenya today, Kenya don't have Nigeria's rain. There are trees everywhere in Kenya. And it makes the environment beautiful. That is why Kenya makes a lot of money from tourism. But Kenyan politicians must rise to the visionary dreams of Wangari Maathai. She played politics too. She was one time a member of parliament, and you hear her voice echoing in parliament. Wangari Maathai is the African woman of my dream. In her, I saw the power of redemptive change. That is why this book also focuses on the empowerment of women. She addresses the importance of women in developing society. She discusses the empowerment of women as a catalyst for positive change, economic development, and environmental sustainability. Maathai founded the Green Belt movement, which focused on empowering women through environmental conservation efforts. You could see that movement of women in Kenya. She had a lot of women following her. She could have caused a women revolution if she wanted, but she did it with the Green Belt movement, quiet revolution. So if you go to Kenya now, you have roads named Wangari Maathai Road. I have taught my daughters the story of Wangari Maathai. In fact, I bought this book for two of them. They can't read it yet. I said, keep it. You will understand it. Papa gave you this book. But they know a lot about Wangari Maathai. I teach them about China. I teach them about the United States. And this Christmas, I'll be going on a tour with them so that they will understand politics and power. I want them to be strong, brilliant, smart, and redemptive in their actions. She talks about global partnership in this book. Maathai addresses the importance of international cooperation and partnership in addressing Africa's challenges. She discusses the role of the global community in supporting African initiatives for development. Wangari Maathai. You see the book I'm talking about? I have it here, entitled The Challenge for Africa. That's this book. Let me read from page 162. She says, my grandparents and others of their generation measured their happiness, their material and spiritual well-being in ways far different from today. Their medium of exchange was goats. They kept domestic animals, which they used carefully for survival, and treated humanely, and cultivated a variety of food crops on their lands. Because most of their basic needs were met, they didn't consider themselves poor. They lived within a community full of rituals, ceremonies, and expressions of their connection to the land and their culture. They didn't feel alienated or adrift in a meaningless, highly materialistic world that assigns value only in dollars and cents, because their word was animated by the Spirit of God. They took what they needed for their own quality of life, but didn't accumulate and destroy in the process. And they did all this so that the future generations would survive and thrive. You need to read this book. Look at this page. There were places where I would have loved to ask her some questions, but I couldn't reach her. She was telling the story here. She says, it was therefore as a member of an exclusive, westernized elite common, then to many societies in post-independence Africa, that I began to listen to rural women speak of their difficulties in obtaining firewood to cook nutritious foods and providing clean drinking water and fodder for their animals. And that was the beginning of the Greenbelt movement. It was through my contact with these women that I began to seek the linkages between poverty and environmental degradation and loss of culture. When I began to build the Greenbelt movement, I thought that all that was needed to encourage people to conserve their ecosystem and restore food security was to teach them how to plant trees and to make connections between their degraded environment and their difficulties. And what she did with this book was to use the simple practicalities in African societies to explain development. It's only a deep thinker that can do that. She has on page 171, Reclaiming Culture. But let me read it, some lines from page 173. She says, in the colonial era and the decades following African independence, the cultures of the African peoples were trivialized and demonized by colonial administrators, missionaries, and local devotees. Then the pre- and post-independence leaders and the international community urged the peoples of Africa to modernize, move beyond their tribal inheritance, and embrace the newer cultures readily available today in films and on television and the internet. African communities have been attempting to reconcile their traditional way of life with the foreign cultures that condemn their own and encourage them to abandon it. Read this book. Get a copy of this book if you can. Classical work on the power of knowledge and deep thinking. Wangari Maathai was a deep thinker. She was a philosopher of intense repute. Wangari Maathai. It's about the challenge of Africa. Wangari Maathai's The Challenge for Africa reflects her passionate commitment to the well-being of the African continent. The book is not only a call to action, but also a testament to Maathai's lifetime dedication to the environment, women's rights, and sustainable development. Her legacy extends beyond this book, as she inspired individuals and movements dedicated to creating positive change in Africa and the world. Yes, I just did a review of the book, The Challenge for Africa. Another subject I want to broach in this class is about raw materials in Africa. 2 weeks ago, I talked about it on Splash 105.5 FM. But I think I should bring the subject back for it to sink. It needs to sink. Look at this. If you see this book, this is the map of Africa. You see it? This book is entitled The Looting Machine. The Looting Machine. You see here? It's about Africa. The looting machine. Warlords, tycoons, smugglers, and systematic theft of Africa's wealth. Written by Tom Burgess. I'll tell you more about this book later. Let's look at Africa's raw materials. Taye Detunji is watching. Thank you. Hassan Ayowole is saying, how do young persons take over African countries when they don't have what to eat? The fact that you don't have what to eat should set your brain thinking, how do I create what to eat? How do I build a society where we find food all the time? It's not to make you'll be lamenting and crying. Yes, it can be painful to be hungry, but deep thinkers will begin to say, okay, I don't have food. How do I create food? That is why they say it is a period of hardship that innovators arise. Check it out. You see, some of the most splendid developments in the world came out during war times. And war times can be the hardest times. Today we talk about radio. It was towards the First World War that radio was improved people like Marconi had the idea of radio. And the idea of radio came from communication challenges among ships on the high sea. If you look at the Titanic, you've seen the movie The Titanic. That ship collapsed because there was no good communication system. There were other ships around that could have come to the rescue of the Titanic. But there was no communication system among the ships. And this was the time Europeans were already on the high sea, conquering different parts of the world. Remember the likes of Christopher Columbus. They didn't go to India in planes. They went on ships. They had to develop compasses, navigation tools. To solve the problem of communication, scientists began to think, how do we create a communication system where I say hello to you and you say hello back? And it will echo. That's how radio came. But the Second World War now led to the advancement of that thought. That's why America is the home of radio. The first major broadcast on radio started in America. So period of hardship leads to great thinking, but in Africa it doesn't work that way. Because Africans always want to find the easy way out. You see that there, yes, people will migrate, no doubt. But you see, in Africa, everybody's migrating. And migration does not mean that, okay, those who just pack their things and leave. Some are here. But when they are ill, they go abroad. That is migration in its own way. You want to do a party, you want to go and get exotic wines from Europe. You don't want to wear made in African jeans. And this is a problem. It is a problem. Let's look at raw material subjects in Africa. And that will tell us how far we have gone. I have talked about the suffering of oil-producing communities in Imo State. Remember? I even wrote an article on it and I posted it on this page. The suffering of oil-producing communities in places like Onhaji and Egbema, in Imo State, in Ogoniland, in Rivers State, in many Niger Delta communities, are a clear example of the failure of leadership in Africa. It's also part of the failure of African culture, in the sense that African culture have not been able to imbibe in the people the sense of purity to protect themselves from foreign merchants whose only interest is profit. So they destroy the African environment and Africans cooperate with them. So the sad stories of many oil-producing communities in Nigeria reminds us of the resource cost syndrome in Africa. Communities like Ochia and Awara in Ohaji Egbema local government area, Imo State, where mineral resources are found in abundance, have become centers of poverty and oppression. And this oppression is orchestrated by foreign interest in collaboration with their local allies. Acts like this has led to violent conflicts in oil-producing communities like Ogoni in the Niger Delta. A professor of political economy, Chibuzo Nwoke, before he died, delivered his inaugural lecture in 2013. I was there, and I was particularly interested in that lecture because I wanted somebody to teach me about the problem of Africa's raw materials, because it has become a problem to the African. So let's listen to parts of that inaugural lecture by Professor Chibuzo Nwoke. It's about Africa's raw materials.
From Kwame Nkrumah, from his work on neocolonialism, the last stage of imperialism, I have a favorite quotation for understanding Africa's resource endowment problems, not as a curse, but properly in the context of the organization and functioning of the world capitalist economic system and the specific role forcefully assigned to Africa in that system as a supplier of raw materials. And this quotation goes as follows. Africa is a paradox which illustrates neocolonialism. Her earth is rich, yet the products that come from below and above her soil continue to enrich not Africans predominantly, but groups and individuals who operate in Africa's impoverishment. If Africa's multiple resources were used in her own development, they would place her among the modernized continents of the world. But the resources have been and are still being used for the greater development of overseas interests. At least from Nkrumah, we now know the origin of Africa's so-called resource curse. In other words, much of Africa's underdevelopment is the result of its engagement predominantly in primary resource production, which is controlled by foreign transnational entities merely for export to the metropolitan countries. Africa's stagnation in the role of raw materials exporter is regularly reinforced by the classical economics principle of comparative advantage. And within the world trade regime, despite its mantra of trade liberalization, every effort is made through Western protectionism to discourage attempts to process and add value to Africa's raw materials export.
State Affairs with Edmond Obilo is live.
Yes, that's Professor Chibuzo Nwoke of blessed memory. He died last year at the age of 18. So he talks about Africa's raw materials in that lecture. The suffering of oil-producing communities stands as a testament to the mismanagement of resources, failed promises, and the urgent need for comprehensive intervention. It is important for stakeholders, including government bodies, oil companies, and regulatory agencies, to address these issues collaboratively, ensuring that the wealth generated from these communities foster sustainable development and a better quality of life for all residents. But what is unnerving too is how the vast resource-rich landscapes of Africa, abundant with minerals crucial for global industries, have unfortunately become arenas of protracted conflicts. These conflicts, fueled by a complex interplay of foreign interest and collaborations with local actors, not only disrupt the socio-economic fabric of affected regions, but also contribute to broader geopolitical tensions. This exploitative destruction of African communities, due to the scramble for mineral resources, also formed part of President Bola Tinubu's speech at the United Nations. So let's go to the UN General Assembly to listen to the speech that Bola Tinubu delivered on the 20th of September 2023. He talks about the conflicts in mineral-rich areas in Africa.
The fourth important aspect of this global trust and solidarity is to secure the continent's mineral-rich areas from plundering and conflicts. Many such areas have become catacombs of misery and exploitation. The Democratic Republic of Congo has suffered this for decades. Despite the strong UN presence there, what happened? The world economy owes the Republic of Congo much but gives very little. The mayhem visited on resource-rich areas does not respect national boundaries. Sudan, Mali, Burkina Faso, Central African Republic, and the list grow on and on and on. The problem also knocks at Nigeria's door. Foreign entities abated by local criminals who aspire to be petty warlords have drafted thousands of people into servitude to illegally mine gold and other resources. Billions of dollars meant to improve the nation's economy now fuel violent enterprises. If left unchecked, they will threaten peace and place national security at a grave danger. Given the extent of this injustice and the high scales involved, many Africans are asking whether the phenomenon is by accident or by design. Members' nation must reply by working with us to deter their farms and nationals from the 21st century pillage of continent riches.
State Affairs with Edmond Obilo is live.
Yes, that's President Bola Tinubu at the United Nations General Assembly in September 2023. Africa's vast mineral wealth, a source of economic promise and geopolitical significance, has become a source of bloody conflict caused by dirty collaboration between foreign interests and local actors. President Tinubu, in that September 20 address at the United Nations General Assembly, defined the complex dynamics surrounding conflicts in mineral-rich areas of Africa. Nigeria suffers from this, and he mentioned it. The conflict in the Niger Delta is an example. Ogoniland was almost decimated by shell in collaboration with Nigerian government. We later saw the rise of militants like Asari Dokubo, Ateketom, and Tompolo wielding dangerous weapons to stake their claims. Look at the Democratic Republic of Congo. That country has fought 2 devastating wars in the last 2 decades that resulted in the death of more than 5 million people. I'm talking of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Kabila's Congo. Yes. The wars in the Congo is still ongoing, but at a smaller scale. The wars are linked to the struggle for resources and power. The Democratic Republic of Congo, endowed with abundance of minerals such as coltan, cobalt, and gold, has been a focal point of conflict fueled by a nexus of foreign and local interests. Armed groups and militia exploit the lucrative mineral trade, leading to numerous foreign corporations engaged in extractive activities in the DRC, often in collaboration with local actors. The program is State Affairs, and I'm looking at raw materials and conflicts in Africa. Look at the Democratic Republic of Congo, and you would see the pain of Africa. I have talked about the wars linked to the fight for resources and power. Armed groups and militias exploit the lucrative trade, and their collaborators are foreign corporations. Companies like Glencore, a major player in the global commodity market, have faced scrutiny for their involvement in the DRC's copper and cobalt industries. The mineral coltan, essential for electronic devices, is a focal point of conflict in the DRC. Companies like Apple, Samsung, and Tesla have faced allegations of indirectly benefiting from the illicit coltan trade perpetuating the conflict in the Congo. Gold, another coveted mineral, is mined extensively in the DRC, often under problematic conditions. Companies like Anglo Gold Ashanti, a multinational gold mining company, operate in the region, and the gold trade has been linked to the funding of armed groups. Have you forgotten Blood Diamond and Sierra Leone? Blood Diamond. How the struggle for diamond led to the deaths of thousands in the Sierra Leonean civil war. Resource cause, they say. The DRC's conflict minerals, including tantalum, tin, tungsten, and gold, find their way into global supply chains, contributing to the perpetuation of conflicts. Companies sourcing minerals from the DRC knowingly or unknowingly become part of the intricate web sustaining unrest in that part of Africa. International initiatives such as the Dodd-Frank Act in the United States aim to address the issue of conflict minerals by requiring companies to trace and disclose the origin of certain minerals, have not really helped Africa. However, these persistent challenges must be solved in the interest of Africa. Concerted efforts are needed to ensure corporate accountability. Why President Tinubu did not emphasize that foreigners are decimating Africa. But he makes the point that the conflicts happening here must be stemmed, and foreign partners are also needed. Also needed are the cooperation of government officials, local businessmen and women, and other stakeholders making their countries dry. Professor Nwoke calls these Africans collaborating with outsiders to cause conflict here as comprador elements. Let's listen to Nwoke again.
In the transition from colonialism to flag independence in Africa, the colonialists had nurtured comprador, which are intermediary elements within the ruling class, to whom political power was later transferred in the neo-colonial period. Comprador is the Portuguese word for buyer. The cadre of professional intermediaries who dealt with the foreign trading houses in the coastal enclaves during colonialism were dubbed comprador elements by the Chinese Marxists. The term neo-colonial indicates that in the transition from colonialism to flag independence, political power was transferred to regimes based on the support of social classes linked very closely to the foreign interests that were formerly represented by the colonial state. As the term is used here, comprador describes those professional intermediaries who organized the access of foreign mining companies to Africa's minerals in the neo-colonial period. In this respect, Nigerian middlemen, for example, constitute comprador elements within the Nigerian ruling class, with its representatives occupying government and business positions and controlling the state. It is these intermediary elements who are closely linked to the very foreign interests that formerly controlled the colonial economy that today superintend over the pillage of Africa's vital resources by Western transnational corporations. Because imperialism relies on the collaboration of local ruling strata, profound political and social changes within the mining countries themselves are required before the African people can gain control of their mineral resources.
Improve industry-university collaboration.
State Affairs with Edmond Obilo is live.
Yes, that's Professor Nwoke there. As we round off this class, I want to look at this book. This book talks about the exploitation of Africa. That is why it is titled The Looting Machine. The Looting Machine. How they loot Africa. Let me tell you about this book. The looting machine, warlords and oligarchs, corporations, smugglers, and the theft of Africa's wealth by Tom Burgess. It's a book you should have in your collections if you are a lover of books. I'm a lover of books. I bought a copy of this book about 2 years ago. And when I read it, I learned some good lessons from the book. The reason we decided to put it on Udara Bookstore, we've gone to bring in some titles into the country so that you can lay your hands on them. So, this book, The Looting Machine, by Tom Burgess, is a critically acclaimed investigative work that delves into the complex and often murky world of resource exploitation in Africa. Tom Burgess, a British investigative journalist and Financial Times correspondent, explores how the vast wealth of Africa, in the form of natural resources like oil, minerals, and land, has often been a source of exploitation, corruption, and conflict. This is the book under review. This is the book I'm reviewing now. What are the key themes in this book? One is resource exploitation. The book sheds light on the systematic exploitation of Africa's resources by various actors, including warlords, oligarchs, multinational corporations, and smugglers. The book explores how these entities often collude to extract wealth from the continent, leaving local populations impoverished. Another theme of the book is corruption and oligarchy. Burgess investigates the role of corruption and the establishment of oligarchies in African countries where political elites and business leaders form alliances to control and benefit from the exploitation of natural resources. Burgess also talks about the impact on local populations. He discusses the devastating impact of resource extraction on local communities. Despite the abundance of natural wealth, many African nations experience high levels of poverty, environmental degradation, and social unrest. If you read this work, you would find deep analysis on the impact of extraction of raw materials on local populations in Africa. The author also looks at global economic dynamics and how it contributes to the exploitation of Africa's resources. It examines the role of international corporations, financiers, and government in perpetuating a system that often prioritizes profit over sustainable development. In this book, Burgess employs vivid language, first-hand accounts, and concrete examples to convey the intricate web of corruption and exploitation in Africa's resource-rich regions. For a more detailed and nuanced understanding, I recommend that you obtain a copy of this book and explore the author's narrative firsthand. The looting machine is recognized for its rigorous investigative journalism and its contribution to the discourse on economic exploitation and social justice in Africa. Get the book, visit udarabooks.com, udarabooks.com. Go on udarabooks.com and get your copy. You can also get your copy on the WhatsApp number pinned to this broadcast. Just chat to Dara Books on those WhatsApp numbers, and you would get your copies of the book. It is a good read. I am not reviewing these ones, but let me call your attention to these good books too. Look at this. I'll be reviewing this book soon by Dambisa Moyo, Dead Aid, Why Aid is not working, and how there is another way for Africa. You see this? You can get this on udarabooks.com too. It's a good read. Then look at this one. Power Development and Institutions in Africa, edited by Sifa Mandla Zundi and Shegas Kamga. Power Development and Institutions in Africa. Good book, scholarly. Good governance, development and democracy are needed to improve the human conditions in Africa. All three must encapsulate the running of post-colonial states, bringing along the people, promoting participation, justice and human rights. The African Renaissance will not happen unless governance, development and democracy come together as one for the sake of progress in Africa. So this book argues that governance, development and democracy must be about fundamentally transforming the African polity, its economy, its social conditions, and its relations with former colonial powers. Get your copy on udarabooks.com or through the WhatsApp numbers attached to this broadcast. It's a great read. You would love reading this book. The last book I will be introducing to you on this edition of the program is The Democratization of Africa, Dynamics and Trends. The Democratization of Africa, Dynamics and Trends. Look at the book. You see it? Why does the future of democracy seem uncertain on the continent? You can see the coups in West Africa. There was a coup scare in Sierra Leone. Was that on Saturday, Sunday? So this book reasons that the democratization processes on the African continent are moving forward backwards, in that the preconditions for continued sustainability of democracy are absent and not plentiful in almost all African nations. In Europe, development preceded democracy, whereas in Africa, development and democracy are being implemented concurrently in the face of austerity measures in order to induce economic growth. So this book argues that development, by all counts, is a precondition for democracy and not the other way around. Second, the book suggests that the democratization processes defy the traditional principles of democracy, where power evolves from bottom up. In African nations, power evolves from top to bottom, creating a deformed and an abnormal form of democracy known as elite democracy, imposed on African people by African elites through external influence of Western European countries in the form of political conditionality and adoption of the Bill of Rights by African nations as preconditions for receiving not only development aid and loans, but also for diplomatic relations. Thirdly, the book concludes that the democratization process are just experiments of transplantation of Western European values to African nations, since Western European values disregard African traditional values and often dismiss them as irrational and primitive, instead of viewing them as complementary. I love this book. I love this book. I can't stop reading it. And I remember gifting the chairman of Independent National Electoral Commission, Professor Mahmoud Yakubu. I gifted him a copy of this book when I visited him in his office before the 2019 elections. Yeah? Powerful book. The Democratization of Africa, Dynamics and Trends. With the introduction of this book, we have come to the end of today's edition of State Affairs. I'm Edmond Obilo. I worked with Ayo Ashimolo and Miriam Giwa to bring you this edition of the program. Join us again on Wednesday from 2 o'clock or 2:30 for a fresh edition of the program. Thank you for always being there. Enjoy the rest of your day.